Marcus is 38. He's a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in Boston. He has not been manic in 4 years. He has not been depressed in 2. He sleeps 8 hours a night. His blood pressure is normal. His thyroid is fine. His psychiatrist, in the medical record sense, calls him stable. So in 2025, when researchers in Istanbul drew blood from 35 people exactly like Marcus, clinically well, no symptoms, no episodes, they were expecting a quiet result: boring blood. What they found instead was a protein called galectin-3 sitting at levels that were not just high, but the highest of any group they studied. Higher than people in the middle of a manic episode, higher than people during depression, highest in the patients who looked, by every other measure, the most healthy. That single finding, replicated and extended across 4 2024 and 2025 papers, is starting to rewrite the entire story of what bipolar disorder is. For nearly a century, we have taught medical students that bipolar is an episodic disease: fire, then forest, then fire again. The new data say the forest is still smoldering between fires in a very specific cellular sense, and we now have a name for the smoke. For the next 25 minutes, I'd like to walk you through what bipolar disorder actually is, not the slang version, the clinical one, the numbers, the brain, the genetics that finally tell us why a 76-year-old salt works, and the molecule that may force us to stop calling this disease episodic at all. The word bipolar gets used as slang to mean moody, or the weather is bipolar today. That is not what this disease is. In the official diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, bipolar disorder is defined by extended periods, lasting at least a week, sometimes much longer, in which the entire brain shifts state. Energy, sleep, thought speed, judgment, appetite, libido, all of it moves together. One pole is mania, not just happy, but unable to sleep, talking faster than other people can follow, confident to the point of grandiosity, sometimes psychotic. The other pole is depression, not just sad, but slowed in body and mind, unable to feel pleasure, sometimes unable to get out of bed for weeks. Between these two extremes is what clinicians call euthymia, the technical word for feeling about the way most people feel most of the time. Here's the part that surprises people. In a person living with bipolar disorder, the depression years vastly outweigh the manic ones. The mania gets the movies and the memoirs, but the depression is where most of the suffering lies, and where almost all of the suicide risk concentrates. That is the disease, in one sentence. A brain that, on a schedule it does not choose, leaves baseline and stays gone for weeks at a time. Bipolar disorder is not one thing. The diagnostic manual recognizes 3 distinct subtypes, and getting the subtype right changes the treatment, the prognosis, and the suicide risk. The first is bipolar 1, written with a Roman numeral 1. Full-blown mania, lasting at least 7 days, or severe enough to require hospitalization. About 1% of the population, give or take. The second is bipolar 2. Same depression, but instead of full mania, the patient has hypomania, a milder, 4-day minimum version that feels like a productivity superpower. This is the subtype most often misdiagnosed as plain depression, because nobody, including the patient, complains about the hypomania. They complain about the depression that follows it. The third is cyclothymia. 2 years of low-grade mood fluctuation that never quite hits the threshold for either extreme. Easy to miss, sometimes treated as a personality issue when it's actually a brain rhythm issue. And then there are 2 extra labels that any clinician will tell you matter more than the subtype: rapid cycling, 4 or more mood episodes in a year, and mixed features, where mania and depression run at the same time. Mixed features are particularly dangerous. The energy of mania plus the despair of depression is the single highest risk combination in psychiatry for completed suicide. If you remember nothing else from this section, remember that one. I want you to remember 5 numbers, because they're the reason this disease deserves more attention than it gets. 1. 40 million people globally live with bipolar disorder. In the United States, the lifetime prevalence is about 4.4%. That is roughly 1 in every 23 adults. 2. The peak age of onset is between 15 and 25. Most cases begin in the years a person is trying to finish school, start a career, or form a family. The timing is brutal. 3. People with bipolar disorder lose, on average, 12 to 14 years of life expectancy. Some of that is suicide. Much of it is cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome, which we'll come back to because the connection is not what you think. 4. Suicide risk is roughly 11.7 times higher than in the general population. Lifetime attempt rates are around 34%. About 6 to 7% of patients die by suicide. 5. Heritability is roughly 70%. This is one of the most genetic conditions in psychiatry, on par with schizophrenia. It is not, in any meaningful sense, a personality flaw or a failure of willpower. Those 5 numbers are the case for taking this seriously. The rest of the video is what's actually going on inside the brain. Let's make mania concrete, because the textbook description does it no justice. Picture 1. The person who doesn't need sleep. 3 hours a night for a week, and they wake up feeling sharper, not exhausted. They paint, they code, they redecorate the apartment at 3 a.m. The family thinks it's a productive streak. It is a brain that has lost the ability to break. Picture 2. The spending. Credit cards maxed in a weekend. A car bought without a test drive. A new business pitched, registered, and announced on social media before Monday. In severe mania, judgment about money collapses first and most visibly. Picture 3. The speech. Clinicians call it pressured speech or flight of ideas. The person sounds brilliant for 2 minutes, then you realize you can't get a word in, and the topic has changed 7 times, and they have not yet noticed you are trying to leave the room. Picture 4, and this is the one that breaks families. Grandiose delusions. The conviction that one has been chosen, by God, by destiny, by the algorithm, for something historic. In bipolar 1, this can cross fully into psychosis, voices, special missions, belief in superhuman ability. K. Redfield Jamison, the Johns Hopkins psychologist who has written 4 books on this disease while living with it herself, described her own manic state as a particular kind of intoxication. The cruel part is that, in the moment, the person who is manic almost always feels best. They're the last to know they're sick, which is why the people around them carry the diagnostic burden. Now, here is the most important and most dangerous misunderstanding in this entire disease. Bipolar depression looks almost identical to regular unipolar depression. Same sadness, same loss of pleasure, same fatigue, same hopelessness. From the patient's chair in a 15-minute appointment, they can be impossible to tell apart. But they are not the same disease. They have 3 differences that are, in the most literal sense, deadly. Difference 1. Suicide risk. In bipolar depression, it is roughly 11.7 times the general population rate. In unipolar depression, it's also elevated, but nowhere near as steeply. The depressive phase of bipolar is the single most dangerous corner of psychiatry. Difference 2. The brain damages itself differently. Bipolar comes with a specific accelerated aging pattern in the cortex that, as of the 2026 Enigma data, does not appear in unipolar depression. We'll get to that. Difference 3. The one every doctor needs to know. If you give an SSRI antidepressant by itself to a person who actually has bipolar depression, you can precipitate a manic switch. Their brake gets released. The depression lifts. The mania detonates. Which is why the first question any responsible psychiatrist asks a depressed patient is not, "How do you feel today?" It is, "Have you ever had a stretch of unusually high energy lasting at least a week?" The manic switch is, mechanically, the single most underappreciated event in bipolar care. Let me show you how it happens. In someone with bipolar 1, the brain's reward circuitry is already configured to overshoot. Dopaminergic projections from the midbrain are hair trigger. The frontal cortex's normal braking function is fragile. Now you give them a serotonin reuptake inhibiting antidepressant. The drug raises synaptic serotonin, which is fine on its own, but indirectly nudges the dopamine system, which in this brain has no functional brake. Within 2 to 6 weeks, the depression lifts, and then it keeps lifting. And then the patient is awake. Here is the modern, nuanced number. In a 2025 meta-analysis of more than 1,600 antidepressant-treated bipolar patients by Tondo, Vasquez, and Baldessarini, the risk of switching depends almost entirely on two things. 1. The class of antidepressant. SSRIs are the lowest risk. SNRIs and tricyclics are the highest. 2. Whether the patient is on a mood stabilizer at the same time. Antidepressants alone are risky. Antidepressants on top of lithium or valproate are far less risky. So the message is not, antidepressants are evil and bipolar. The message is more precise. Never give an antidepressant for what looks like depression until you've ruled out bipolar. And if you do, never give it without a stabilizer underneath. The patient whose depression is suddenly responding miraculously well to a new antidepressant is, until proven otherwise, the patient you need to see back in clinic this week. Until about 20 years ago, the bipolar brain was thought to be normal on imaging. The disease was real, but you couldn't point to it on a scan. That changed when the Enigma Bipolar Disorder Working Group started pooling brain scans across 50 international sites. The 2018 Enigma paper, with 6,500 participants, found that bipolar patients had measurably thinner cortex in 3 specific regions: the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the inferior parietal cortex, and the inferior temporal cortex, roughly the regions for emotional regulation, attention, and decision-making. The 2026 update is more striking. Using machine learning trained on healthy controls to estimate brain age from MRI, what they call brain pad, the predicted age difference, bipolar patients consistently appear older than their chronological age. Their brains, structurally, look like brains of people 3 to 5 years older. And here's the part that connects to everything else. The longer the disease, the larger the gap. The more episodes a patient has had, the more accelerated their brain age. This is what clinicians now call neuroprogression. The idea that bipolar is, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, a progressive disease, just on a slower timeline. One implication should not be lost. Catching this disease early and preventing episodes is not cosmetic. It is structurally protective. Every prevented episode is, in a literal volumetric sense, brain you keep. Now, why is the bipolar brain aging faster? One major pathway that the field has zeroed in on, especially in the last 5 years, is metabolic. The rate of insulin resistance in bipolar patients is between 30 and 52%. The rate of full type 2 diabetes is 2 to 3 times higher than in the general population, and it shows up earlier in life, often before any antipsychotic medication is involved. Insulin resistance is not a cosmetic issue. In the brain, chronic insulin resistance promotes neuroinflammation, impairs glucose uptake in neurons, and triggers low-grade activation of microglia, the brain's resident immune cells. Activated microglia secrete inflammatory cytokines. Those cytokines disrupt synaptic plasticity, accelerate gray matter loss, and, in the long term, may be a major contributor to the cortical thinning we just saw on MRI. So the picture, very recently, and this is the bridge to the molecule we are about to spend 10 minutes on, is that bipolar disorder has a quiet biological engine running underneath it, not a switch that's on or off, a slow-burning fire fueled by metabolic dysfunction and immune dysregulation. One plot twist? Worth flagging. In 2025, a Mendelian randomization study in Nature Mental Health found that people genetically predisposed to higher GLP-1 receptor activity, the receptor that drugs like semaglutide and liraglutide work on, have lower rates of both depression and bipolar disorder, independent of their blood sugar. The metabolic and psychiatric brains share more biology than we used to admit, and in the next 5 years, it's plausible that GLP-1 agonists will be part of bipolar care, not just for weight, but for the brain itself. Now I want to bring you back to Marcus and to the molecule we opened with, galectin-3. Galectin-3 is a small protein, about 30 kilodaltons, with a strange double identity. It is the only member of its family with both a sugar-binding domain and a long, flexible tail that lets several copies clip together into chains. In the brain, it is made and released primarily by the microglia, the resident immune cells of the central nervous system. When microglia are at rest, they are quiet, branching, doing surveillance. When they are activated by injury, infection, or, as the field now thinks, by chronic metabolic stress, they transform. They retract their branches. They thicken. They become what's called disease-associated microglia, or DAM. Galectin-3 is what they throw when they make that switch. Mechanistically, 3 things happen. 1. Galectin-3 binds to a receptor called TREM2 on neighboring microglia, locking them into the activated state. The activation spreads. 2. Galectin-3 primes a molecular machine called the NLRP3 inflammasome, which churns out interleukin-1 beta, one of the most powerful inflammatory cytokines the body makes. This was shown in a 2025 traumatic brain injury paper where blocking galectin-3 reduced inflammation, neuronal death, and cognitive deficits. 3. Outside the brain, in the lungs and liver, galectin-3 drives fibrosis, the scarring of tissue. Drugs that block it were originally developed for pulmonary and liver disease. Now here is why this matters for bipolar. In a 2025 study published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, blood galectin-3 was measured in 3 groups of people: 38 patients in active mania, 35 patients in clinical remission, euthemic, and 40 healthy controls. The euthemic group had the highest levels of all 3, not the manic group, the patients who, on the outside, looked the best. And the level correlated with the patient's total lifetime number of episodes and the duration of illness. For decades, the textbook diagram of bipolar has been a square wave. Manic, well. Depressed, well. Episode, recovery, episode. The galectin-3 data are telling us, gently but unmistakably, the part of the line that we called recovery, the flat part where the patient looks fine, is not flat. The fire is still burning, just underground. So, if bipolar disorder is, at least in part, a smoldering inflammatory disease, 3 clinical implications matter right now. Implication 1. Suicide. In 2025, a group at Lund University showed that galectin-3 levels in the blood track galectin-3 levels in the spinal fluid of suicide attempters with a correlation of 0.77. That's a strong correlation by neuroscience standards. It means we may now have a peripheral blood marker that reflects what is happening in the brain of someone at acute risk. Note the caveat. The same study did not yet show that galectin-3 levels themselves predict who will attempt. The link is between brain and blood, not between molecule and behavior. But it's a translational foothold, and there wasn't one before. Implication 2. Treatment targets. There are drugs that block galectin-3. They were not built for psychiatry. They were built for fibrosis in the lung and liver. Belapectin, an intravenous galectin inhibitor, is in late-phase trials for liver cirrhosis. GB0139, an inhaled version, is in trials for pulmonary fibrosis. None of these have been given to a bipolar patient yet. The gap between we have a molecule and we have a trial is, in this case, a deliberate clinical research decision that has not been made. It's coming. Implication 3, and this is the big one. It breaks the episodic model of bipolar disorder. If galectin-3 is high in euthymia and rises with cumulative episodes, then remission is not really remission. It is a slow biological progression hiding behind clinical stability. That is the same framing that the multiple sclerosis field arrived at 15 years ago, when they realized that disability in MS accumulates between visible relapses, not just during them. The implication, if it holds up, is that the goal of bipolar treatment cannot just be to abort episodes. It has to be to put the fire out, including the part of the fire we can't see. Let's talk about why this disease runs in families, because it does very strongly. Heritability is around 70%. If your identical twin has bipolar 1, your own lifetime risk is roughly 40 to 70%. If a first-degree relative, parent, sibling, child has the disease, your risk is about 5 to 10 times the general population. In March 2025, the Psychiatric Genomics Consortium published in Nature the largest bipolar genome-wide association study ever assembled. About 158,000 cases, 2.9 million people in the total sample. They identified 298 independent genomic risk regions. That's up from 64 in the previous version. The signal maps onto inhibitory neurons of the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, and, interestingly, onto pancreatic and intestinal cells, which is another hint at the metabolic axis we just discussed. But the most beautiful result of 2025 was rare variant work, not common variant work. Two genes called ACAP11 and HECD2 came up as the highest effect rare risk genes for bipolar disorder in two independent groups, Broad Institute and Iceland's Decode. What do those two genes do? They regulate independently the activity of a kinase called GSK3-beta, glycogen synthase kinase 3-beta. Now here is the punchline. GSK3-beta is the molecular target, discovered later, of the oldest, most reliable bipolar drug we have, lithium. We have been treating bipolar with a salt for 76 years, prescribed empirically, with nobody understanding why it worked. In 2025, two independent rare variant studies found that the two genes with the largest effect on the disease both, separately, regulate the exact enzyme that lithium inhibits. That is the closest thing biology gives us to a smoking gun. The universe handed us, finally, the lab notebook. I want to take a moment on lithium because it is one of the strangest stories in modern medicine. In 1949, an Australian psychiatrist named John Cade thought he had discovered a poison. He was injecting urine from manic patients into guinea pigs, trying to find a toxic substance. He suspected uric acid and was using lithium urate to make it dissolve. The lithium urate calmed the guinea pigs. Cade then gave lithium to 10 patients with mania. Within days, the most severe cases were lucid. Within weeks, they were going home. For 76 years since, we have given lithium to millions of bipolar patients. We watched it work. We watched it fail in some. We knew the dose-response curve down to the mil-equivalent, and we had no idea why. Now we are starting to. Mechanism 1. GSK3-beta inhibition. Lithium is one of the most potent direct inhibitors of this kinase known to medicine. The kinase regulates circadian rhythm genes, neuronal apoptosis, and synaptic plasticity. As we just said, the two highest effect rare bipolar genes converge on this exact enzyme. Mechanism 2. Structural neuroprotection. In long-term lithium users, MRI shows the opposite of the cortical thinning we discussed earlier. Hippocampal volume and amygdalar volume actually increase. Ussel and Bearden's groups reported bilateral hippocampal growth on lithium. Gray matter increases on lithium. Lithium is, in a literal volumetric sense, growing parts of the bipolar brain back. Mechanism 3. Anti-suicidal effect. This is the cleanest of all. In multiple independent meta-analyses, lithium is the only psychiatric medication with a robust replicated effect on lowering suicide rates. Not antidepressants, not antipsychotics, lithium. And one extra fact worth knowing. A 2013 Karolinska study found that long-term lithium users have longer leukocyte telomeres than matched controls. Telomeres are the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten with biological aging. Lithium is a cellular aging modifier. The downside is real. Kidney damage, thyroid problems, narrow therapeutic window, which is why a company called Alzamind is developing a co-crystal of lithium with proline and salicylate called AL001 that delivers similar brain levels at roughly half the standard dose. It's preclinical for now. But if it works in late-stage trials, it could finally bring lithium to the patients who need it but can't tolerate it. Beyond lithium, the 2026 Bipolar Toolbox has 5 pillars. Pillar 1. Mood stabilizers. Lithium, valproate, and lamotrigine. Old drugs, well characterized, still the foundation. Lamotrigine in particular shines for preventing depressive episodes. Pillar 2. Atypical antipsychotics. This is where the most movement has happened. Lumateperone, brand name Caplyta, was approved for bipolar depression in 2021 and is in phase 3 trials for mania, with results expected this year. Lurasidone, brand name Latuda, has the strongest data for bipolar depression with minimal weight gain. Iloperidone received FDA approval for bipolar mania in April 2024. Pillar 3. NMDA modulating drugs. The new frontier. NRX-101, a combination of D-cycloserine and lurasidone, is being developed for suicidal bipolar depression with FDA breakthrough designation. Blixpredil, an oral non-hallucinogenic NMDA antagonist, showed a 6-point reduction on the MADRS depression scale at 24 hours in early trials. That's the rapid onset profile of ketamine in a pill, without the dissociative side effects. And then, the surprise of 2024, psilocybin. In a JAMA Psychiatry trial led by Aronson, 15 patients with treatment-resistant bipolar II depression received a single 25 mg synthetic psilocybin dose plus psychotherapy. Most met remission criteria at 3 weeks. Most stayed in remission at 12 weeks. And critically, no one switched into mania. This flips the long-standing assumption that psychedelics are categorically unsafe in bipolar. Pillar 4. Rhythm therapy. IPSRT, interpersonal and social rhythm therapy, developed by Ellen Frank at the University of Pittsburgh. The premise is that sleep, meal timing, and social schedule are not lifestyle advice. They are biological zeitgebers, and in bipolar disorder, disruption of them is the single most reliable trigger of an episode. The 2024 Korean Fitbit study found that nighttime step count and short sleep duration predict impending mania. Pillar 5. Brain stimulation. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, has growing evidence in bipolar depression, with odds ratios around 2.7 for response. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, remains the single most effective treatment for life-threatening mania, severe mixed states, and acute suicidality. Ketamine, given carefully, produces antidepressant and anti-suicidal effects within hours. The 2024 review suggests it does not significantly elevate switch risk in bipolar depression when used with a mood stabilizer. Here is a finding that genuinely surprised me when I first read it. Your phone, your smartwatch, your Fitbit, the ordinary devices you already wear, may know you are about to be manic before you do. In a 2024 study by Lipschitz and colleagues at Brigham and Women's Hospital, 54 bipolar patients wore Fitbit Inspires for 9 months. The researchers extracted 17 digital biomarkers: heart rate, step count, sleep duration, time of peak activity. They trained a forest classifier on this data. The system predicted depression with an area under the curve of 0.86. It predicted hypomania and mania with 0.852. Those numbers are not perfect, but in psychiatry, they are remarkable. They are better than most psychiatric scales clinicians fill out by hand. A 2025 MedRev paper went further. Phone call speech features, accelerometer data, location data, and how often someone interacts with their contacts, fed into a multimodal model. This combination classified mood states with 76% accuracy and detected state changes with greater than 97% precision and recall. The pattern, summarized as one rule of thumb: speech tempo and tap rate on your phone start to shift 7 to 10 days before the patient feels manic. Step count rises before they notice the surge of energy. Sleep gets shorter without subjective awareness. The hopeful implication is enormous. If we can detect the prodrome with a watch and a phone, we may be able to intervene. Sleep enforcement, medication adjustment, a check-in call, before the episode actually breaks. Prevention, not just treatment. We are, as a field, on the edge of changing bipolar care from a reactive disease, where we wait for episodes to happen and then chase them, to something closer to a forecastable one. I want to leave you with 5 counterintuitive takeaways, because they are the ones most worth passing on to a friend. 1. An antidepressant, given alone to a person with undiagnosed bipolar disorder, can detonate a manic episode. The drug works too well for a few weeks, then keeps lifting until the brake fails. If someone's depression suddenly, miraculously responds, that is the week to ask, not the week to celebrate. 2. Lithium, a salt discovered by accident in 1949, physically grows parts of the bipolar brain. Hippocampal volume goes up, telomeres get longer, suicide rates drop. We finally know why. It inhibits a kinase that the highest effect rare bipolar genes both regulate. 3. Clinical stability is not biological stability. In the patients who look the best, euthymic, working, sleeping normally, blood galectin-3 levels are higher than in the manic patients. The fire keeps smoldering between the visible episodes. This is why feeling better is not a reason to stop treatment. 4. Bipolar is partly a metabolic disease. Insulin resistance affects up to half of patients and feeds the neuroinflammation that drives brain aging. The same GLP-1 drugs that are reshaping obesity care may, in the next 5 years, be part of bipolar care. 5. The patient is almost always the last to notice. In hypomania, the brain feels best, sharpest, most productive, most charismatic. So the diagnosis depends, brutally, on what we call collateral history, what the family and the friends and the partner saw. If you are the family member, your observations are clinical data. If you are the patient, the people around you may be your best early warning system. Listen when they raise it. 2.5 centuries ago, when a person had violent shifts in mood, they were said to be possessed. 1 century ago, they were called manic depressive, a term that was at least closer to the truth. Today, we know that bipolar disorder is a brain disease with about a 70% heritability, 298 identified genomic risk regions, a measurable structural signature on MRI, a metabolic engine running underneath it, and a smoldering inflammatory signal that, even during periods of clinical wellness, never fully turns off. It is treatable. The single most reliable drug we have is still a salt discovered in 1949. But now we know why it works, and we are building better versions of it. Atypical antipsychotics, NMDA modulators, and possibly, very carefully, psychedelics are widening the toolbox. Wearables may, in a few years, help us see episodes coming before the patient does. And the people who live with this disease, K. Redfield Jamison, who wrote 4 books about it from inside Johns Hopkins, Stephen Fry, who told his story on BBC, Carrie Fisher, who joked about her ashes being carried in a Prozac pill, have done more to destigmatize it than any psychiatrist ever could. So before you close this video, I'd ask one thing. If you have a friend or a sibling or a child whose moods are all over the place, or whose energy seems to ride on a track they don't control, please don't pass that off as a personality quirk. Mention what you saw. Send them this video. The earliest interventions are the ones that protect the most brain, and the people in the middle of a hypomanic episode are usually the last to know they're sick. Bipolar is not a personality flaw. It is not laziness. It is not the weather. It is a brain disease, and one of the most treatable in psychiatry when we get to it in time. Thanks for watching.